Good morning. Good morning, Redeemer. Good morning, Betsy. Good to have you with us. Good to be here. And let's see what we got going on here. I got some messages from y'all to check in with. And last week we had a very lively week. And so I think probably building on the liveliness of last week, today will be super, super low energy and mellow and no questions. No, I've got a couple questions. I've got a couple questions left over from last week. And particularly I had a really wonderful question from Leslie Martin, who consistently asks great questions, just FYI. So I want to address Leslie's question. I had another question that I kind of want to sum up because it was several questions in a row from an anonymous questioner. Good morning, Leslie. I'm going to get to your question today that you asked last week, but I wanted to jump into a question that was asked to me anonymously, privately last week, and it was from a parishioner, not of this church, but of a different church within our denomination. So someone who's lifelong Episcopalian and was asking the question about sort of like what happens when you you like your church but you don't necessarily like your priest. That wasn't their exact words. Their exact words was something like, you're not in the same place as them, or you kind of outgrown where they're at. There was different language around it. And I'm just trying to kind of depersonalize it and sort of make it a kind of a broader question, because I think it's kind of this important question about a person's relationship with their church, with their faith community, and particularly like a new clergy person comes in or has been there for a while and they start to do things and you don't necessarily always like the direction that they've gone, or you don't necessarily know if you have a place in the way that they see the church running. And it's got to be a really tough thing for a parishioner. We've had people who have left Redeemer during my time here. And there were people who left during the previous person's time and the people who left during the previous person's time. And of course, other people show up and the body shifts and changes. And some people stay constant and just roll with it no matter what happens. But there is that dynamic at play. And I mean, the first thing I would say as a priest and a person that I know that I bring things to the table at this church that aren't for everybody. And that's odd. It's tough for you if you're one of those people. Believe it or not, it's tough for me because it's not just the church is not just a place run by fiat by a dictator. And you come into a place in people love their church. People who are part of a church love their church. Even people with significant concerns about their church, or people who are on the margins oftentimes, still love their church. People who show up every week love their church, and people who only show up once a month oftentimes quite love their church. And we all have this interaction with our community in different ways. And I'll say two things, I'll say a few things because me, I never know when to stop. But one thing I would say is priests don't always love their church the same way that the parishioners do. And how could they? This is your church. And likely if you stay in the same area, it stays your church. But clergy have a weird job where we come into a place and are in the center of things in a lot of ways and moving things around and sort of these leaders who are asked to be a part of your life in really intimate and deep, beautiful ways. And then we go away. Even if we've been there for 20 or 30 years, maybe it's 4 years, maybe it's 30, there's still a reality that by and large, we are in the group, but not of the group in some really unique ways. But there are priests, and I don't want to defend all clergy, there's no reason to defend anybody. We're just having a conversation about how it works. The reality is that some clergy really don't understand the necessity to love their people. And so there's that reality that there's like clergy have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to love you. And I don't mean to have a responsibility to feel all the right feelings. You can't control your feelings. but to act lovingly. And it makes, and by the way, it makes your job easier when you actually do have these warm feelings. I have immensely warm feelings for my congregation. And by my, I mean the one to which I belong, not the one that belongs to me. Um, you know, but we have that concern. I think that there are priests who talk down or think less of their church or wish they'd be different place. And that's painful because you've chosen your church, right? Um, and so there are some issues around that, and clericalism can rear its ugly head where clergy can think that they're better than other people. Um, and then there's another side, which is when the clergy person is doing everything they can to the best of their ability, and it's just not necessarily the right fit between you and that person. That the clergy person might be loving people appropriately and care deeply for their church and might even be taking the church in the right direction. Who knows? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But sometimes, we just try as we may, we don't actually connect with every single person we meet. And that can be tough because, the person could be there for a while, the priest could be there for a while. And if you don't feel a connection to an emotional or spiritual connection to what the priest brings to the table in that situation, I that can be really tough, and it's hard. I don't know that I have a full answer for you because I'm not in that position as a clergy person. I've been a clergy person now for, I've been ordained for a little over 10 years. And I don't know. I always liked the pastors that I had, I guess. Well, I moved to North Carolina and I was a layperson and I jumped around to a couple different churches, but that was, I guess, church shopping, right? I hadn't picked a place. I remember my first Sunday visiting this church, one of the churches in Charlotte, and it was like this rector's, either his last Sunday or he'd announced that he was leaving. And these ladies greeted me at the piece and they could tell that I was new. They're like, "You've never been here before?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." They're all, "Welcome to our church." And then they said, he's announcing that he's leaving, and she said, "He's been here for 7 years. It's about 6 years too long." She said that to me. I was like, "That's awesome." That's pretty hardcore. But so I didn't really experience it. I know there are people who really appreciate the work that I do. And I know there are some people who kind of like grit their teeth when I talk and are wondering how much of me they have to put up with. I know that that's part of the deal. It's a really strange dynamic, and I think for each person, it really is a question of what you're capable of doing and how you're capable of sharing relationship in a faith community with a person you're not always on the same page with. Sometimes we feel like we've gone past, we're not in the same place that someone else is. Maybe we feel like we've grown beyond them or they've grown beyond us or something like that. And those are tough. It's all tough feelings. So what to do when you're at a church as a parishioner and you're not on the same page as your rector, and you're not really sure what you can do about that. I really, in my personal experience, I'm not going to at all say that I'm flawless at it. I try to put the relationships that we build here at this church above all else. I try to put the relationships we build and to have healthy relationships on whatever level those relationships exist with every person in our parish. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to be on the same. I'm not interacting with everyone on the same level. I'm literally physically not capable of doing that. But to know that I want to the degree that I'm able, cultivate a relationship of trust and mutuality with every person that is a part of this place to whatever degree is possible. So when you're not on the same page as your priest, if you're a parishioner, being upfront about that could be okay. Being upfront with them about that you're not on the same place about the certain things. And then asking questions about, or maybe literally, I don't know, I'm spitballing, but maybe literally asking the question like, "Hey, you and I are in very different places around what we were wanting for this place, but I'm not going anywhere, and maybe you aren't either. What does it look like for us to work together? What does it look like for us to? But that's a vulnerable question, right? Like, I'm creating a situation that requires a certain level of vulnerability. That's what's tough. So much of what we want to do in a Christian community is build spaces where people are allowed to be vulnerable, and myself included. I think people. I want to just say, like, priests are humans, which but there's a level of vulnerability when we put ourselves out there. When anytime we make a statement, anytime we preach a sermon, anytime we do the things for which you pay us, the things that you expect us to do. If we're doing it honestly and carefully, if we're doing it with love in our hearts, it requires a certain level of vulnerability. And that could be anything. Like, that could be like asking for money for the church. It's like vulnerability. Praying with people is vulnerability. Talking about, if we're going to have a conversation about politics, we're going to have a conversation around what's going on in the world. Anytime I try to step out and make a statement in any way, shape, or form, in a social media platform or in my blog or in a sermon or in a conversation with someone, I have to remember that, if I anger someone, that reflects back to, and many times to them, as organized religion or the church or even God. So, like, no pressure, right? And that's just and I'm not saying only clergy feel that. Like lay people can feel that too, especially if you are doing something in the name of the church, right? If you've got an Episcopal shield sticker on your car and you're cutting people off in traffic, right? Like, it creates a dynamic. Oh, so that's what Episcopalians are like. They cut people off in traffic, huh? So I think that our relationship with our churches are living, breathing, and they develop and they move, and they're not always the same day in, day out, even if we stay constant in some way. Our faithfulness might be in our attendance, and our intention to be present. But how we feel about that isn't always going to be exactly the same day in, day out. And how we feel about the clergy we work with isn't always going to be the same day in, day out. Obviously, there may be a situation where you feel like you have to go to another church. I don't want to pretend like that's not an option. It is. I think it's a really painful option. And I think if someone gets to that point, like when someone comes here from another church, you'd think I'd be like, oh, you're at my church now. Cool. And I am. I mean, on some level, I'm always happy when someone shows up. But I'm also like, I want to know, is everything like, how did it get to this point? Like, what's going on at your last place? What are the things that are making you feel compelled to make this move, right? Because it's painful stuff, and when people decide they can't be here, whether it be because of something that upset them or because they are just feeling like they're in a different place from this church, or they don't like me or whatever, I try to meet with them. I try to offer exit interviews, so to speak. I've done it a couple times with people, and I think my thought is, I'm not trying to get people to come back. I'm not trying to like solve the problem so much as I'm trying to like maybe learn from that experience, hopefully grow a little bit, hopefully figure out what I could have done better and make amends when possible, and also make sure I'm clear about what I thought I was doing or what I think is happening with the church. You might have guessed I've thought a lot about this, both in terms of people who've left in the past, but also in terms of thinking about, as we move into the future, what we want our church to look like, and the recognition that not everyone's going to be on the same page about all those things. And that's just tough work, right? All right. Are you guys still there? I haven't seen any chat on the side. I want to make sure that I'm coming through and a person who's doing stuff. Let's see here. No response. Let's see if I can pop out the live chat. Maybe it's there and I'm not. Nope, still nothing. Y'all present? Leslie, Betsy, anyone? Bueller? Oh, good. Fantastic. That's a tough subject. I hope I said anything that made sense there. And I hope to the person who sent me that question, I hope that you are able to find a sense of peace and common purpose at your current place, if possible, and with that current person, if possible. Trying to really live into relationships can be difficult, can't it? But we do try to put relationships at the forefront of what we do. I really believe that that's what's supposed to be. All right. Leslie's messaged me on Messenger saying she got logged out somehow, but she's still here. And Leslie, I'm going to jump into your question. So, first of all, Leslie started by talking a little bit with me about interactions with someone who identified as a Christian Scientist. And they were opposed to Leslie taking any kind of medications for any kind of depression, anxiety, anything like that. And sort of like the anti-medicine, God made you a specific way sort of thing. So she had some questions about that. Is there actually something in our scriptures that suggests that medication goes against the natural order of things? And the simple answer is no. There's nothing in scriptures that would suggest that medicine is bad. Christian Science is not Christianity. It is a different faith, a very different understanding of Jesus, and it's got the word Christian in it, right? But Christian Science believes that all illness is actually sort of spiritual illness. And so if you're sick, that you're really succumbing to the spiritual forces of the world, and that it's almost like your mind giving into these things is what allows your body. Oh, good, you're back. So like the idea that your mind giving into these things, your spirit, being weak in some way, allows for you to like your body to succumb to illness. And so that the succumbing to illness is really actually like a symptom, a spiritual symptom. And so the suggestion that if there is something going on chemically in your brain, then the Christian Scientist perspective, as far as I understand it, would be that, of course, medicine wouldn't be the way to go. They would suggest that this is something that you need to address spiritually through prayer and essentially believe harder, believe better. There's other traditions around this, like religious science. There was a thing that came out about 15 years ago called The Secret, which was all about this. And it was really compelling. Like I had a guy that I worked for that was really into a church of what was called the Church of Religious Science, which is similar to Christian Science, but not simply Christian. It was more New Age. And he was really into The Secret, and made me watch the video, and it's very compelling. But it really comes down to like positive thinking, being able to change and affect your life, like cure cancer through prayer and through like don't give the cancer any energy. Like if you fight cancer, you're just giving the cancer your time and energy. It would mess you up for a while. You think about our president, if you have to, coming out of the hospital and saying, don't be afraid of the coronavirus. Don't let it dominate your life. If anyone was hoping that he might learn anything from this experience, your hopes were in vain, right? Because he kind of operates under this assumption that like if you're just strong enough, then you'll be fine. Meanwhile, getting literally the best care in the world. And the arbitrariness of who gets sick with this disease and what that looks like. Right. Thoughts and prayers are great, but medicine is more immediately effective. Well, and they serve different purposes. I'm not saying that the body and the spirit aren't connected. They are connected. but it's not just like an equal, like you pray for it and it goes away. That's not a thing. When it's a thing, that's a miracle, and miracles are so named and they're named as such, and they are understood as such because they're not at all normal, right? I mean, come on. So there's no really, there's no good theological argument for anti-medicine, anti-science. It's not there. It's not there. You can't make it. There are traditions and there are aspects that I don't fully understand. I don't know a lot about Jehovah's Witness as a tradition that it was, it's a little different. Again, Jehovah's Witnesses also have a very different understanding of God than Christians. Some people, they are a Christian tradition. They self-identify as Christian, but they don't believe Jesus is God. So it's a different, the implications of that lived out are different. And their understanding of scriptures is very different than the typical orthodoxy of Christianity. Orthodoxy being defined really by the creeds, by adherence to the apostles and Nicene creeds, in terms of the dogma of the church, right? But Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't believe in blood transfusions. And I know someone who was deathly ill and wouldn't get a blood transfusion because it was against their faith. And so there are times like that where I don't understand what is happening, why we would do that. But Leslie asked, but I would say in terms of our tradition, in terms of what we understand as Christians, in terms of our interactions with scriptures, I've never met an Episcopalian who thought that medical intervention was bad, or that medicine was inherently bad, or that you should just pray that away. But I also don't want to suggest that there are no that our spirit and our body are not connected, right? Body, mind, and spirit connected. And so I don't want to say that your spirit has nothing to do with it. That would be, that's above my pay grade. I don't think I have the right to, or the ability to say that. Right. Okay. Leslie asked another question as well. And it was around this idea of people being born with medical imbalances, chemical imbalances, or things like that going on in their body and their mind. I have a child who was born with a cleft lip and cleft palate. I have a good friend, a mentor, who had a son who was born with spina bifida. And then we all have our stories. We know people who, have had all sorts of issues. It's not actually that uncommon to know people with a variety of different kinds of things that have gone wrong. And so Leslie's question, which I think is great, is why does God have to be like that? Right? If God made me this way, what the heck, God? What's the deal with you, God? And I think that's a really good question. We talked about it's not evil, by the way, that what we're talking about, but we did talk, what was it, last week, about theodicy, about the problem of evil. And similar to that, I don't think that this is a problem that can be solved. Why does God got to be like that is not something that I can quite grasp. That God is like that if one believes in God. Some people go, well, God has no control over that. I don't think I buy that. I felt really connected to God in going through the experience with my child. And it wasn't my experience, it was their experience. So I don't want to speak for them. And as they get older, I will have to stop talking about it. But at least in terms of the parents' experience of having a child and having a child be born into the world with things that we knew right out of the gates were going to have to be fixed and dealt with medically. I felt like that was something that God had done, not as a punishment or as a bad thing. Now, when this child gets older, they may really think differently about that. And I want to, and I'm getting into really, really tricky territory here. Like, I probably should shut up, right? because I don't quite understand what God has done and what God hasn't done. I don't get what is God's, like, what God makes happen, what God lets happen. I don't think things sneak by. Like God's like, what? I was over here. I'm sorry. I was, I was working on my cupcakes and coronavirus slipped by me. Had no idea. What? I don't think that. I guess what I would say, I don't know which things I don't know which are the things for which God is responsible. And I don't know how we'll ever understand that. That's just true for me. I live in that space where I live in this space where I get that there's things about God I don't get to know. And that includes which things are of God's providence and which things are not. Which things did God do and which things did God not do? I don't know. So I could be wrong about my child. I could just be wrong, totally wrong. And that I can see God in it is not to say that God is making it happen, but that within whatever happens, I can see God making other things work. And I talk about this a lot. I've talked about this before. We're coming up on this point in Genesis in our Bible study where, Joseph, his brothers, first they want to kill him. Then they decide not to kill him, but they sell him into slavery, and he becomes a slave in Egypt, and from a slave in Egypt to a prisoner in Egypt. And through this series of fortunate events, he ends up becoming essentially the right hand to the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And in that space, it creates a situation where he's able to not only save Egypt, but save all of his brothers and the sons and daughters of Israel and what becomes the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. But at the time, it's just Israel, which is Jacob and his sons and daughters and family. Joseph saves all of them from this famine, and they move to Egypt and they reconcile. But then their dad, Jacob, Israel, dies. And they're all like, now that dad's dead, Joseph's totally going to kill us, right? And so they go to Joseph and they're like, you're going to kill us now, right? Like you're still holding this against us. And what's really fascinating to me is that Joseph goes, no. First of all, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. But then he says, what you did was evil. You meant it for evil. God used it for good. Which he doesn't say God did this thing. He says you did this thing. But the evil thing you did, God entered into that space and redeemed it. This is the idea of providence. The providence of God is not necessarily, as far as I understand it, that God plans everything out in a specific way. But the idea that in whatever situation you find yourself, God is present and can be found. And God can it's basically God making lemonade, right? Cosmic lemonade out of the existential lemons. I think. But the idea being that while we cannot understand what God's doing or which part is God's, we can still, if we want to, if we seek God, we can still see God's presence and blessing and all the things that we attribute to God through our understanding of God in faith, in the Christian faith, of the grace you can find, the love and connection that you can find. So Leslie says, it seems like a dick move, but it's God, right? I mean, that's the trick. I actually think that like that, what you just said, Leslie, is like where I come down. Like, well, I don't I'm not sure I like that at all, but okay. There is a sense of entitlement baked into us where we think that we are entitled to know exactly which things God is responsible for. Now, the rebellion against some of this is important because if you're being controlled or part of a church that is trying to control your life and they're making arbitrary decisions and attributing them to God, that can really be an abusive relationship, can't it? When humans use their free will to throw lemons at each other, God sometimes catches them and makes holy lemonade, right? I mean, it's interesting to see where God is present in this pandemic, where we have seen God enter into our lives in this. Do we have eyes to see God's presence in this, right? Do we have, do we have eyes to see and ears to hear, as Jesus says, like the words of God, the sound of God's presence. And I think, like, I don't want to sound like is that way there's lemonade in the narthex of the coffee after church. Yes, that's God made. That's holy lemonade. Watch out. We just had to have a good non-coffee alternative, right? I don't want to sound like anti-intellectual or like that I'm discouraging people trying to figure God out. I just sort of feel like I'm really bad at understanding everything God does, but I'm kind of okay at spotting God in the moment. And I think that there's something about staying in the moment, staying in the now, staying in today, which is holy. Jesus talks about this. Worrying about tomorrow, worrying about the next day. Today is enough for today. And that to me is a picture of eternity, the experiencing of the present and finding God here. But I don't mean to say that to discourage us from pushing ourselves into seeing if we can find God in all sorts of finding God in all sorts of beautiful ways. So in my case, the kinds of things that God broke open in our lives through our child's birth abnormalities, physical abnormalities in birth, the kinds of ways that we cherished that child and cherish and it's not a more or less, it's just a different love. Like, it's part of the way that I understand my love for that child. And there's something really beautiful in that, right? These moments and these times. Yeah. I'm curious in your case, I'm trying to think about the things that you said, Leslie. You've been pretty open. You've been pretty open about things like being bipolar and your experience with that. And you've been pretty open with your own, recognition of the role that mental illness has played in your life. And that phrase is so stigmatized, and it shouldn't be. You've been someone who's been really helpful with me and like remembering that, like, no, this is not a stigma. This is like anything else. Like in my case, like I said, with one of my children, like talking about a cleft lip or cleft palate, like, and people would be like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll never notice." And I'm like, I want to notice. I want it. What? Don't tell me what I'll notice or not notice. It's my kid. I don't want to hear that I wouldn't notice it. I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. I don't want to live in a life where that wasn't. I'm not in denial, right? I'm not in denial about the child that is in my life, and I'm not at all embarrassed or disappointed in the person that they were born as. And I think this is an important thing to recognize is, and you just said it sucks, but it's part of who I am. Like, it sucks, but it's part of who I am is an attitude we should all be better about having. But we've been taught that certain limitations placed on us or inhibitions or certain differences inherently make us less than. And the best, there's such a thing as an ideal version of us. That the ideal version of Leslie wouldn't have this, and this. That the ideal version of me would be this, and this. I think I'm more and more rejecting that as I get older and saying, I don't see God there. I don't see God in the constant struggle of our constant struggle to fit in and to be a perfect, quote unquote, perfect version of ourselves. That there's this idea, this platonic idea that there is this platonic ideal version of you that exists shaped like this, right? And you have to try to fit into that mold. And the degree to which you fit into that is the degree to which you're the right kind of person. And the degree to which you don't is the degree to which you're the wrong kind of person. And so you spend your life trying to fit into the mold that was preordained for you. I reject that. I think that's garbage. And I think I've thought it for a long time that it was garbage, but I bought into it before then for a long time. And I'm learning how to disassociate myself. But you think about all of the things that we talk about in our culture, a fear of like the idea that the nuclear family as described in a very specific way as the ideal family. And then when people can't live into that, and you see all sorts of drug and alcohol abuse and physical and emotional abuse and the violence to oneself and to others when people try to conform to a specific idea of a preordained perfect version of you. And then you just think about God in Jesus Christ. That what is Jesus but the rejection of a platonic ideal? Because Jesus doesn't fit that mold at all. Not of noble birth, not of legitimate birth by our definitions, by the culture's definitions, not of the right bloodline according to anyone but like a very small group of people, doesn't win the right way, doesn't conquer the way conquering's supposed to look, is killed, hung, a criminal's death. I got dough here. A criminal's death, naked, hung from a cross in the grossest of shame. And we look at that moment and say, that's the moment of God's greatest glory. Does that sound like Jesus is about us fitting into the mold of something? And yet we are hounded by and hound each other and ourselves with this idea of a specific way we're supposed to be. And I think the degree to which we're able to get rid of that is the degree to which we're able to be liberated, freed from sin, and freed for service and love of one another, to care for one another. There's a thing I'm reading Leslie's side chat. There's a thing in abled communities that really make the disabled community feel looked down on called inspiration porn. It's all the videos and stuff of disabled people running marathons or being successfully performing as most people do normally, right? And we watch them and go like, isn't that? I cry. I mean, I'm one of those people, I cry when I watch that stuff, right? Say more, like I want to know more, Leslie, about how that, I mean, I have some ideas. I think I get what you're saying, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that's damaging. Because I think a lot of us, when we watch those things, sort of like are proud of someone else, right? But I can see how it's like, look, they're just like us, or look, as you said, look, they're doing something we did. I do think there's it's demeaning because it's just like, it's not inspirational to us. It's us functioning more cookie cutter like society wants us to do, right? Congratulations, you fit into our mold. The other thing that it is yeah, it centers, and if we can't do that for whatever reason, we're a burden on society. Man, the whole concept of a burden on society is such garbage, isn't it? You think about people getting older and they feel guilty. You meet people who've worked all their lives and they're so bad at retiring. And so often people are bad at retiring because they don't know how they matter if they're not working. This happens with clergy so much. One of my biggest concerns for my own self is, who will I be if I'm not Father Phil? How will I take the collar off and when? And I know I don't have to, I mean, I know I'm only 10 years in, but that kind of thinking, like that kind of thinking is really present in my life and in my head. Betsy Berry's talking about her dyslexia has always been a fight. You and I've talked a little bit about that in person, right? You have this idea then, Betsy, that like, I mean, I can't even imagine what it was like growing up with that in terms of people just thinking something negative about you. And one of my best friends, he's a tremendously successful guy who does really good work. He's brilliant. He's a brilliant engineer. He can't read worth a dang. I mean, theoretically he can, right? He learned to read, but he listens to books. He doesn't read books. He listens to books. The guy could sit down and do any math problem, but he cannot sit with a book the way I do, right? And the idea that means something bad about him and good about me is amazing. Like, it's crazy, right? Yeah. And Leslie says, we have to accept that our baseline is not up to societal standards, and that's the best we can do. Otherwise, the extra mental energy to ignore the burden we are is too taxing to function. Man. So this is what I'm talking about, right? Like, where do we see God in this? In the burdens, the two of you, I have my own stuff, but I always feel like it's really minor in comparison to other people's things. But I have my own things that keep me feeling like I'm not enough. Mine, I have a lot of, body image issues. Yeah. Some of you know that already. Yeah. And Leslie says, people bringing it up, like when someone with an invisible disability parks in a handicapped space and someone yells at them because they think the placard is fake. They mean well, but they're directly hurtful. Yeah, I mean, so much of that could just be like from people minding their own business and not assuming they know everything, right? We always feel like we're trying to fix things or rescue people, instead of changing a system that's unhealthy. What would it look like? So where do we see God in our various limitations? And what does it mean for us? Limitations is an interesting idea. Like, there's certain things that I'm just not capable of doing. That's all. By virtue of the body and the life I've been given, there are certain things that I can do and certain things I can't do, and that's that, right? One of my struggles of my life is understanding, trying to understand where limitations come into play. I was raised to sort of believe I could do anything if I wanted to, which is its own kind of sickness, actually, because you can't. So then if there's something you're not good at, then you feel guilty about it, right? Or you make excuses. Well, I'd be better at that if. But like, no matter what, I was never going to be a professional basketball player, right? Betsy says, I'm old enough now that it is an advantage. Being old, you mean being your age is an advantage? That's interesting. Because people defer to you mean, or because, and I know you don't normally, if you need to take time to respond, that's fine, but that's an interesting idea. But I just think about, like, if we just acknowledge that people come with limitations and stop thinking that that was bad. And then we kind of all got together and like, so what are your limitations and what are yours and what are yours? Right. Like, I'm married now 12 years. So, this isn't a big issue for me. So I'm not dating, but can you imagine if you were like dating and you like, okay, so like date one, like, so what are your, like, as far as you understand yourself, what are your limitations? Oh, well, I've got some trust issues, and I've got a good relationship with these people in my family, but a bad relationship with these people in my family. I've got some, like kind of a mild eating disorder and some body dysmorphia stuff. And I'm a pretty faithful person, in this area. But then I kind of like gets really skeptical and cynical about these other things, right? What about you? And the other person's like, oh, well, I sometimes suffer from crippling anxiety and disability, and there will be days when I can't get out of bed or function, and then there's these other days when I'm able to like build this beautiful sort of, I could build a whole, world, and I could do this whole thing. I could create these things, these, wonderful things, and I can be there. I can like sense your joy and basically an empath. I can sense your joy in your sadness. But on the other hand, I sometimes misread that and I go off in tangent. Can you imagine if we just sat around with each other and like listed all our stuff, and then we're like, okay, so this is the data, like no judgment, by the way, no, like, so what do we need to fix? Just like, oh, okay, good, okay, so what would it look like for us to build a relationship with one another and to have a community where this is known and not stigmatized, and then like just sort of just loved for what we are, right? Betsy says, that's what your response to my thing, to have all your helper systems in place and old age problems easier to cope with. It's, it's a fair point. When you think about when you accept aging, then when something happens, one, we've got a lot of medicine around people aging. So we have some sense around things and practices that could be done. But there is also this like genuine sense, I think, of human maturity where you realize you don't need to run a marathon. You don't need to get to that point. There are things that you don't have to, like, you're allowed to not have to feel like you have to do everything. I'm rounding that corner, where I'm not feeling like I have to be and do everything. And I am very egocentric. I'm a very, very egocentric person. So this work of like letting it go and locating myself somewhere other than the center is an ongoing work, an ongoing dissembling, an ongoing deconstruction that is not always going well. I don't always have it right, just period. But that idea, right? That's interesting to me. And again, then where is God in that? If we center our lives on God, and then God is the God of love, that is, in the Trinitarian understanding, a God that is inherently and always in relationship, in harmonious relationship, and that we are invited into the love life of God by the power of Jesus, by the work of Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit. We are given the ability to enter into that eternal kind of harmonious dance of God, that love life relationship, and then the way that we experience that here, to the degree that we're able to, is in how we live that out with each other. And so then think about this. Where's God in this? Think about Leslie in Canada and Betsy sequestered away in Walnut Station, and me here, or Chestnut Station, sorry, and me here, and all of us in our little places, and anyone else watching this later, and we're all just sort of splaying out our different issues and concerns, and then loving each other, and then and talking openly about it. Like, where's God in that? I mean, God's the one allowing it and giving us the power to speak the truth about it and wonder about it, and the creativity to think through new ways of understanding ourselves and each other, and the grace to accept the things that we can't, the serenity, right, to accept the things that we cannot change. Like that's a really beautiful thing to me. Like, so in this conversation the three of us are having, like thinking it through like this, is an example to me of like where God is. And think about it, that it comes not in the first time we do this, but in like the 30th time we do this, right? I don't know how many we've done of these, but we get to know each other, right? It feels really good. And we get to know each other. And then once we know each other and feel safe with each other, then we can start being like a little bit more honest, right? And a little bit more clear about what both our joys and our fears are. And then some really beautiful things can happen. Transformation occurs in relationship. Change occurs where there's trust, and trust takes time to develop. It's one of the hardest parts about our current culture is we want to change people's, like, everything's just a big bumper sticker, right? I mean, even me, my presence on social media, I mean, I try to be present in a way that is and active in a way that is cultivating and developing relationships. But there's still a level to which I have to post something, which is basically like a bumper sticker. It's just a bumper sticker that allows for people to write on it underneath, right? Pray for Trump, right? How dare you, and well, I'll pray for him so long as it looks like this, or thank you for finally saying that, you great patriot, like whatever the thing is, and then turn around and be like, Trump's a white supremacist, which by the way, he is, but for the record. And then people go, oh, so you hate him and blah, 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 blah. Like, so how can you say both? And so the social media aspect is like this sort of like we just throw these things out there. And so the dangerous reality is, are we actually cultivating relationships of trust in which we can really, truly live into ourselves, acknowledge our limitations and our strengths, engage with one another, and believe that we are cared for and supported? In terms of being a burden, Leslie, not that you're the burden, but you brought up the idea, right? We worry about burdening others. Paul uses the language in Christian community of bearing one another's burdens. So it's not that you are a burden, it's that you are burdened with certain things. And then the question should be, in our community, how can we share that so that you are not alone in it, right? How can we share our burdens? My burden, how do I share that with you? And your burden, how do you share that with me? It's not, I don't think it is communism, though. I mean, for the record, I'm not at all a fan of Marx. He's an atheist and a sexist and a racist. So that's problematic, for the record. And I see God's presence in these things, right? So I'm not comfortable with that. Even though I know you're kidding, I'm also not kidding. Like, I am really, like, the sort of current movements that are really psyched about Marxism, I'm like, there's some insight there in terms of his understanding of some of the issues that capitalism brings to the table. But there's a lot of problems there. There's a lot of problems there. Acknowledging some of the issues with our current sort of economic system, and recognizing that he was able in his time to call attention to some of those. I'll stop. That to me is a benefit. And beyond that, I don't have a whole lot of nice things to say. So I think it's like Marxism is sort of chic right now. And I think that it's worth understanding the places where his commentary is important and trenchant, and then other areas where he's just, I think, misses the boat so much, including the whole concept of a dialectic that isn't, it's going to look like this. It might, I don't buy it, but the vision of us putting each other and ourselves and our sharing of one another's burdens ahead of our own personal gain at all times is something worthy of conversation, right? Like, that's worth our time for sure. And the acknowledgement that people get treated like commodities. People get treated like, for instance, why should our president get better healthcare than anyone else? you can't give me a humane Christian reason why one person should get better health care than another person because one person makes more money or has a better title. Like, that's not Christian. And if you're like, so then you're communist, I don't see what, like, are those my two options, right? Like, are my options like capitalism, communism? That's it. Those are my options. That's all we got. Like, you're either this or you're this. Be one. You know. Oh man, I reject that. Do we believe that it makes sense? And by the way, this isn't just because our current president is responsible for the deaths of thousands, right? I'm not even talking about that. Like, just any president. Pick your favorite president, your favorite one in the world, right? I did. I mean, I think you should pray for Trump's health and well-being. I'm a jerk like that. I don't like him, and I think we should pray for his health and well-being. I think he's a child of God for whom we should. I don't want to pray for anyone to get sick or anyone to die. And that's at odds with my own feelings about him in a lot of ways. Because you could see the cosmic justice in your mind of him getting sick from this and dying from this. You could go like, oh, see. But it's that thing inside of me that's like the that makes me uncomfortable. Is that where I want to, do I want to enjoy the suffering of another person? I don't want to be a person who enjoys the suffering of other people. And yeah, I mean, a big part of it is, by the way, when it comes to this thing, I had someone say, well, I did it. I prayed for him to get better. And I felt like a fraud. And I was like, I was laughing. I was like, is that the first time you've ever felt like a fraud praying? Like, welcome to the party, pal. Like, feeling like a fraud is a big part of the deal, isn't it? To me anyway. I'm not sure I've ever prayed and didn't feel like a fraud. I mean, praying almost is an act of yeah. Fake it till you make it. Yeah, I think that's genuinely an important thing. We should pray. I mean, when you look at all the prayers for the president in our prayer book, they are that the president. I mean, actually, I don't even need to like paraphrase it. You know, I'll show it to you. It's really fascinating to me when we do choose to pray for the national. We have prayers for national life or something like that, right? And when you look at that, it says, prayers for our government. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send down upon those who hold office in this state, commonwealth, city, county, town, whatever, the spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice, that with steadfast purpose they may faithfully serve in their offices to promote the well-being of all people. So praying for them means praying that they will act with wisdom, charity, and justice with steadfast purpose for the faithful servants of promoting the well-being of others. You know, to the president and members of the cabinet, to governors of states, mayors of cities, and to all in administrative authority, grant wisdom and grace in the exercise of their duties. Bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations on earth. Listen to this. This is the prayer, the prayer in our prayer book for the president of the United States and all in civil authority. O Lord, our governor, whose glory is in all the world, we commend this nation to your merciful care, that being guided by your providence, we may dwell secure in your peace. Grant to the president of the United States, the governor of this state, blah, 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 to all in authority, wisdom. Grant them wisdom and strength to know and to do your will. Fill them with the love of truth and righteousness, and make them ever mindful of their calling to serve this people in your fear. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God forever and ever. Amen. The prayers that we pray are that whoever is in a position of authority would live into that authority with holiness and care, with intention and wisdom, and seek justice and truth and promote the well-being of others. That's our prayer. Goodness. I can pray that. I can pray that. I'm about done. Yeah. Love you guys. Thank you for your time and your energy today. And to all those who watch us, I had a couple people message me after last week and say, I didn't get to watch it on the time, but I watched it later and it was really cool. And that was cool. I hope that you get to watch it. If you're not, I hope you get to, some of you didn't get to be with us earlier, get to watch this. To all those who sent in questions, and I'll try to send out a note earlier in the week next time to get, like on a Monday, to get more questions for next Tuesday. But I continue to be grateful for this opportunity for us to be together and talk. Betsy, I got to the third episode of Luther and immediately was like, what have I done to Betsy? I am so sorry. I am so sorry. That show is so messed up. It's so messed up. I should not have let you watch that. I just heard good things about it and I watched the first episode and I was like, this could do. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Listen, to be clear to others who are watching, Betsy got into Game of Thrones and watched the whole series like 3 times. So in my mind, I'm like, listen, if Betsy can handle Game of Thrones 3 times, she can handle anything. And then I watched the third episode of Luther and I was like, or not. So I feel awful. I owe you some bread and an apology. It's a good show though. It's well done. It's well made. Oh boy. You should just watch Schitt's Creek. You should just watch Schitt's Creek from beginning to end on Netflix, Betsy. It'll open your heart and make you feel joy, and you'll laugh and think of good, happy, wonderful things, and a family that cares for one another, and really the kind of thing we're talking about in this conversation, which is the sort of the dissembling of a way of seeing the world that was unhealthy. And Schitt's Creek, in my opinion, is like a people who are learning in their own way to dissemble and deconstruct their own preconceived notions as they live more deeply into love for one another and the people around them, all while being just one of the funniest shows around, right? So that's worth your time for sure. Also, if you have Amazon Prime, which you do because you're watching Luther, I always recommend Catastrophe to people. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. And The Good Place, Leslie points out, The Good Place is top 10 of the last decade. I mean, one of the best sitcoms of our time, The Good Place. Absolute joy and delight and thoughtfulness and beauty and love and care. And the new episodes are out on Netflix. I saw them when they were on NBC, so I've now seen the whole show. The last season is phenomenal, just a phenomenal show. The Good Place is a show that only gets better. And the first season's amazing. You think it's not going to, and it does. It ends so strong. So, Betsy, there's some shows that you might like. You've watched all of Schitt's Creek. Good, then you know already. Check out Good Place. If you haven't seen The Good Place, oh my gosh, you're going to love The Good Place. It's so good. And so good. And listen to some Lyle Lovett this week, everybody. Put some Lyle Lovett on. He's good for your soul. If I Had a Boat, one of my favorites is a song of his called I Live in My Own Mind. I Live in My Own Mind is just my favorite song of his. But I love all his stuff. I mean, you could just put it on shuffle and you'll be happy with him. He's pretty great. So, all right, team. Much love, all that. See you next week. I'm gonna sign off. UB40. You can listen to UB40. Good times being had over there at Casa Berry for sure. All right. I will talk to you all very soon. All right. Be well. Okay.